This is Strange Assembly episode 252, Game of the Year 2017/2018. This is Strange Assembly, your tabletop gaming podcast. You can find us on the web at www.strangeassembly.com. You can subscribe to the podcast there, in the Apple Podcasts app, on iTunes, in the Google Play Music Store, or anywhere fine podcasts are sold. You can find us on the usual social media. We're facebook.com/strangeassembly and at strangeassembly on Twitter. We'll love you forever if you check out patreon.com/strangeassembly and support us there. But today, we are going to be talking about the best games of 2017 and the best of what we've played of 2018 so far. And by we, I mean myself, Chris Stevenson, along with Jay Earl.
Hello.
And Mike Cook.
Hey.
If you haven't listened to one of these episodes before, the general rules are like this. First, we're going to talk about 2017, because you can't really, at the end of 2017, have a full discussion of 2017, because you couldn't possibly have played enough games. So, Mike and Jay and I are going to talk about what our personal favorite games were. Then we'll announce the, actual Game of the Year for 2017. Note that the Game of the Year is based on voting, and that voting includes people who are not on this show. So you cannot, in fact, add up the voting add up the favorites of Mike and Jay and I to get the final outcome. So don't be confused by that. Then we will go on to 2018 and what I call the preliminary Game of the Year, which is really just our favorite games that we've played so far, with the acknowledgement that that is certainly going to change as over 2019 we play more games from 2018. And as far as what is eligible for these, so I do a lot of role-playing gaming too. We don't do role-playing games in these, so don't be surprised when you don't hear things like, Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition or whatever in the list. This is your board and card games. And it can be board games, card games, miniatures games, but we also exclude what I would call lifestyle games. So the idea of this is really, okay, if you're the sort of person who tries out a variety of different games, which ones are most worth trying out and playing? And so we're not going to say, oh, you know what, Magic the Gathering, that's still a pretty nifty game, because it really kind of consumes you to play it at any kind of serious level. We do include games that are tournament games, if they're the sort of game that can at least theoretically be played on something resembling a budget. So the sort of easiest hard line is, if you're an actual LCG from Fantasy Flight, or if you're Phoenixborn from Plaid Hat, which I guess is kind of Fantasy Flight now, you know what I mean. Those sorts of things are okay. But if it's an actual CCG where you have to go buy booster boxes and booster boxes and booster boxes, that we would not include. So Magic or Dice Masters. Really, I think the big thing is that if it's randomized and requires you to buy bunches of packs or whatever, or if it's a miniatures game that expects you to drop, $1,000 every time you want to switch armies, we're going to take a pass on that for these list purposes. Not that those can't be worthy games, but it's just kind of outside the scope of this list. But on to the actual games for 2017. Each of us is going to go over our top 5. We're going to take turns, and I'm just going to give you guys a heads up that for the three of us, there is a significant amount of overlap in our 2017 choices, which hopefully just means that these are all really good games, because we all seem to agree on that. But it does mean that I'm just going to go ahead and skip number 5 to begin with, because every single one of our number 5s appears later on one of the other person's lists. And why don't we just go to your number 4, Jay?
Okay, so my number 4 is Dice Forge, which I love this mechanic. It's a new mechanic. It's called Dice Forge because through the course of the game, you are forging dice. It comes with plastic dice that have no faces, and then faces that you can put on them. So It's like a deck building game, but you're literally building the dice. It starts with it's got basic resources on all the sides. You roll the dice, you get the resources, you spend the resources to get better sides, you swap out the sides of your dice, you keep rolling. It's low for me because it is like the first time I've seen this, and it's a very simple implementation of this idea of changing out your dice. I'm really hoping that somebody takes this idea and runs with it and makes a deeper game, because I love this swapping out dice faces and deck building your dice. So yeah, that's the basic real heart of the game, is take a standard deck builder, and instead of making your deck builder, you're making your dice better.
I got Dice Forge. I quite enjoyed it, but just to echo what Jay is saying, you're right, because you have the different card slots that are the cards that you buy that's part of the game. Honestly, I felt like there just weren't a ton of options in the game, and that ended up hurting its replayability for me. I really enjoyed it, but I actually ended up getting rid of it already. Just because I'm keeping my space very, very small, so it's like a great game, but also it was like not the staying power I wanted.
I have Dice Forge it would be in my top 10, so it's not going to appear in this episode. It's a nifty game. It's a great mechanic. You're right. It's pretty straightforward, which of course can be an upside, right? It is it means that I can play it with a 10-year-old, right? Or an 8-year-old. That is, it can be played there, but yeah, does not have massive strategic depth, but it's a fun game. So that's Dice Forge, published in the US by Libelud, and then our other number 4s, we have even more repeats, because wow. So why don't we just go to Jay? What's your number 3?
Well, okay, my number 3, we're getting on, why this podcast started. Legend of the Five Rings, the re-release last year by Fantasy Flight, when they brought L5R back as an LCG. I'm not sure what else to say about this, because, could easily go for hours, because we have. If you don't know about L5R, how did you find your podcast? Why are you listening to our podcast? But yeah, it's the magical samurai living card game put out by Fantasy Flight. And it's great, but it's also bordering on lifestyle, and so I have other things that I've been enjoying more. Although they're also bordering on lifestyle games,
which we'll talk about some more as we.
We'll get there.
Everyone, just remember this. Remember that comment that Jay just made, and keep it in mind when we get to the 2018 games. Just keep it in mind.
What? I apparently like lifestyle games because there's at least a half dozen between the two lists.
Yeah. Yes. So. Yeah, Legend of the Five Rings. It was it tied for the preliminary game of the year last year, I want to say.
I think everybody had it at first.
The three of us did. The people who vote but who do not regularly appear on the podcast are not old L5R diehards. Right. So it did not get that push from them, but still it was enough for it to be up there. But I think for me, part of this is just changing lifestyle situation, right? We had this announcement about anymore. Like I just don't play Legend of the Five Rings in a way that lets us, have podcast episodes that are all about how to play the card game. We can still have a podcast episode where we casually talk about it, where we talk about the story, or we talk about the RPG, or something like that. But just a whole episode of strategy we don't do anymore. So, but yeah, as Jay said, this podcast started out as many moons ago as a Legend of the Five Rings CCG podcast. It's gone, the property has gone through a lot. It was purchased by Fantasy Flight Games. They launched the LCG last year. They launched the role-playing game this year. And you can go back in this podcast feed and get, introduction to the L5R LCG material. But as much as I like L5R, it's just not something that I'm in a position to get to play tons. And so it was lower on my list, and it was on my list but lower, and it was on your list but lower as well, Mike, right?
Yeah, I've got it. I had it at number 5, and it's somewhat similar to what everybody else is saying. I mean, I still love the property. I still think it's great. I do think the release cadence has really hurt keeping the momentum going in play communities. Obviously, that's not intentional. They've got to try different things. And once you're in the middle of it, you can't really change it. But having nothing to keep your interest for a while, and then all of a sudden having to drop, what, like $90? It's almost like being back in a CCG over 6 weeks or something like that. It's almost like being back in a CCG in a way. And I think they figured that out, and obviously it seems like they're responding to that, which is fine. I put it at number 5 just because honestly it's L5R. Like there's a lot of other games I probably could have put at number 5, but it still has a really big place in my heart, and I want to come back to it. But it also is a game that does take a while to play. Like it's still not a fast-playing game, and there's just a lot of other games that I can play in that time frame. And on top of having to try and wrangle people to like actually play it and keep up with it and update their decks, I still love the game. It's great. The world is great. All of the story is fantastic. If we did RPG products for 2018, L5R would easily be my number 1. But yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll add role-playing game products to the slate at some point. We had this whole off mic discussion about the some of the ups and downs of trying to do role-playing games. Obviously, you have things like the Ennies that do role-playing games well, but you're right. L5R did. I mean, apparently they have also concluded that these 6 packs in 6 weeks was not a great way to do it, because Fantasy Flight is shaking some of the release things up for their LCGs anyway, but L5R seems to be leading the pack on that front. Although I do have to say that while I get the general sentiment, spending $90 over 6 weeks on an LCG is not really like a CCG, because $90 might not even be a booster box, and a set comes out and you have to buy like 4 of them or something like that. But depending on the CCG.
Well, no, but part of the LCGs, it is a bit more spread out. Like it's like $15 a month, which is perception-wise different.
Yes, no, I like the individual clan boxes rather. I've even said
Right.
I'd rather they just released one set for $90 than like the not really spread out. Like it's spread out, so I have to be constantly revising the deck, but it doesn't give you that sense of the money not being as much because it's spread out.
Yep. Peek behind the veil a little bit.
Yeah, so that is Legend of the Five Rings, obviously from Fantasy Flight Games. And now we'll get up to our number 2s, where this time Jay doesn't get to introduce a game. I know. What is up with that? Don't worry, you still have your number 1 left.
Okay, good.
But how about your number 2, Mike?
So my number 2 is Warhammer Underworld, since that's the technical title of it. Shadespire is technically when the game came out. That was the first core set, but everybody thought it was just called Shadespire because that's what the big name says. But then they put out Warhammer Underworld's Night Vault. And everybody's like, oh, I guess Warhammer Underworlds is what the actual name of this game is. Anyways, I came into it with Night Vault, but obviously the game came out in 2017, so I'm just counting it in 2017. It's a minis game from Games Workshop where you're playing in the new Age of Sigmar. The reason this is on my list is for a number of things. Number 1 is it's definitely not a lifestyle game because you buy the core set and that's enough for 2 people. You have a team of people that you bring. The game is actually 2 to 4 players, so you can easily play it multiplayer. Each person just has to have a board and some tokens. And basically, you play 3 rounds, and you're fighting the other teams for objectives and victory points. So you actually have cards in your hand, which are the victory points, as well as killing your opponents, obviously gives you victory points as well. And at the end of 3 rounds, you get to score again, and then whoever has the most victory points wins. So it's a really interesting game in that if you actually play to your victory points, you can have all of your people die and still win the game, which may seem a little bit weird, but, a lot of times, faction-wise, it makes a lot of sense.
Blood for the blood god.
Pretty much. And Corn is one of the things, is one of the groups. Also, what's really interesting is when you buy a group for it, a team essentially, that team is it. Like, you can't add to it or subtract to it. Whatever you buy is what you buy. And even things that would be adjacent in the regular Warhammer world, right? Like, if I have the Sepulchre Guard and I also have the Night Gaunts from the new Night Vault starter set, they actually don't interact with each other, and each group has their own cards, because there's generic cards and then there's team-specific cards. They can't even use each other's team-specific cards. Like, they are completely, entirely separate teams, so there is no team building. There is deck building. You do get to build your own decks for both the victory points and for the actions that you do. But I just thought it's really cool. It's really fun. It's a lot faster than I was expecting. It's not just straight up brawl, each other's faces off. There's a lot of strategic thinking with it. Also, the models are just fantastic. They're super easy to put together. The Goblin team has the most members of anything so far, and I think I put it together in like 45 minutes with a couple of clippers and a little bit of a knife and a little bit of super glue, which you mostly don't even have to use on most of the figures. And the figures just look great. The poses and whatnot just look fantastic. So it's a lot of fun. It's really fairly inexpensive. A team is like $30. The base set, I think, is $60, which is the cost of 2 teams, and you actually get way more than that in the box. The new one, Night Vault, actually adds magic. That's why they put out a new base set, because you actually have magic dice in there you didn't have in the base set in Shadespire. So, and they're putting out new stuff for it. New teams are coming out pretty rapid fire. I actually ended up really liking Age of Sigmar. It's really weird, and for some reason I like that a lot more than the old Warhammer. Although I know a lot of people probably be mad about that, and people had a lot of years invested in it. I actually think Age of Sigmar is they're kind of going all in on it, and it's just a lot of fun. So that is why it is number 2 on my list.
So, Mike, let me ask you the most important question about this game. Can you play Ratling in it?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I'm sold.
They're all the teams seem to be fairly good.
You had me at Ratling.
Yeah.
Is that Spite Claw's Swarm?
And there should be another one coming out that actually has magic, because basically all the factions had, not all the factions, but some of the factions had non-magic sets, which was the original run, and then Night Vault, now that there's magic, all the new folks have magic people that are coming out.
And Warhammeristas out there, we're aware that they're not called Ratlings in Warhammer. They're Skaven. We know.
Well, everything's turned into something they can copyright, right? So, I mean, that's why they call them elves now. AELF. I'm not kidding. Everything. They're not orcs anymore. They're I can't remember, but it's also they can copyright the names.
Yeah, trademark. But seriously, they renamed that's.
Yeah, they've renamed everything that's like a generic term is now a specific term, so they can actually. I mean, I kind of get it, but still, it's.
I get it. It's still funny.
Oh yeah, it is.
Respelling the word elves. What is the?
It's AE.
What is one of the old cards from Magic? The not another Aether Vortex. Not another Elf Vortex. I don't know. Okay, so that is Warhammer Underworlds. I guess specifically Warhammer Underworld Shadespire from Games Workshop. So my number 2, which also appeared earlier on both Jay and Mike's list, is Civilization: A New Dawn, or if we want to use the trademarked version, Sid Meier's Civilization: A New Dawn. Because, right, anybody can call their game Civilization, but you have to pay to call it Sid Meier's Civilization. And this is not even slightly the first board game version of Sid Meier's Civilization. This is not even the first board game version of Sid Meier's Civilization from Fantasy Flight. But it is the version of Sid Meier's Civilization that plays the quickest and has the least potential issues with, the long game where one player is effectively eliminated because there's combat. This follows the general idea of Civilization, while I think being more abstracted than any other board game version of Civilization is. And I think that works well because there's so much that goes on in the computer game of Civilization that is handled by the computer processing everything, that you really can't get that directly close to it in a board game. So, but Sid Meier's Civilization is played on a hex map. You start with a city and a few control markers around your city, and then you have to build out from there. You have caravans that you could send out for economic things. You can, of course, send out military units. You can colonize new spaces. You can really do all of the things that you would normally expect to be able to do. But I think there's two primary innovations that this one does that kind of change up how it plays. The less important one, and is probably just the way that you win, in that you have 3 different victory target cards, and each one of them has 2 options on it, and you want to get one from each card, and that's how you're going to win. And there's a variety of those, and you don't play with all of them every game. So when you're playing, you need to tailor how you're playing to the particular victory conditions that you're aiming for, and that prevents things from being samey every time. And it means that you can't win by just going around and stomping everyone. You might want to go around and stomp other people to stop them from winning, but it's not going to get you directly closer to victory just attacking people over and over again. But the thing that I really like is the card track, where you've got the 5 different actions. Like, you've got a technology action, and you've got a commerce action, and you've got a military action, and those, the longer it's been since you use them, the more powerful they will get. And so it discourages you from just taking the same action over and over again. And then as you level up your technology, you have to pick and choose which of these cards you're going to improve at which point of the game. Do you want to have much better caravans, or do you want to have better attack power when you're going after barbarians, or whatever? And it just works out really elegantly, and then it ties in with all the terrain types on the board, because each of those is rated, and it matches up with one of the slots. So if you want to move your caravan through mountains or something, you have to have the really powerful caravan action. Otherwise, you have to go around all of that. But I think it just does a really good job of instilling the feel of Civilization into a game without being this massive, drawn-out slugfest. So what were your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you. I liked a lot of the innovations in the game. The whole action board rotating through and making it so that the longer you delayed the gratification, the better your action was. I love that mechanic. That is so great, where every turn you're in a bind of, okay, do I take the action I really want right now, knowing it's not going to be as strong as it could be if I savor it? Yeah, there's so many little mechanics in this game that I really put together. I thought it was great, yes.
Basically what you guys have said, I think it does really well embody what Sid Meier once described as a game, which is a series of interesting choices. That basically just feels like that game from beginning to end. And I never felt like there was a bad decision anytime that I'm playing the game. There might be some, this is maybe a little bit mediocre, but nothing just felt awful, which can happen in most games. Also, Fantasy Flight, you put out expansions like clockwork. Where's my expansion for this game? Because that's the only thing I would really request for this. And I just need some more map tiles and some more civilizations. That's all, and I would be happy. But really, that's my only complaint with this game, is just that I want more stuff.
I wonder how well this game did.
Right.
As much as we all liked it, I don't get the sense it's not super highly rated on BGG. It doesn't seem to have gotten a lot of visibility. You can go and buy it for $27 on Amazon right now, I think.
I think people were actively mad that it was not just a reproduction of Civilization like their old Civilization was.
Which was a good game for what it was, but is that, it's more like the computer game in that it is a long long thing that can result in players just getting crushed.
And also that you can't just pause it and leave it if you need to go make a sandwich or something because you're bored with it.
I don't have anything else to do this month, so I will play Civilization.
Okay, so now we are up to our number ones, and since it's been a bit since you got to introduce a game. Why don't you go with your number one game of 2017, Jay?
All right, so my number one was Charterstone. Right, this was the Stonemaier entry into the Legacy game, even though it doesn't say Legacy on it. I think this is the only Legacy game I've seen that doesn't say Legacy in part of the name. Anyway, it starts as just a lovely little worker placement game, which is one of my favorite genres. I love me some worker placement games. But then it starts doing all of these interesting Legacy things. So, like, it's worker placement. All of the places that you have to be putting your workers are stickers that you pull out of, when you start, you have a card, you pull a sticker off of it, you stick it on the board, now you can have a place you can go. One of the fixed places on the board that's always available is, over the course of the game, you're getting more of these cards, and so you get go to a place and you take the sticker off the card and you put it on the board. Once you do that too, for most of the cards, you still got the card with no sticker. You can now go to a different place and pay some resources and basically shred what's left of the card and go get some more cards out of the box. And you're just constantly building and improving and adding interesting things. There's a little bit of story. It's just enough to be interesting, but that's really the backbone, the background. This is like the perfect worker placement game, and it's just adds all of these. It also, one of the classic problems with worker placement games is they get complicated fast, and that can turn people off, whereas this is a nice slow burn. You play it the first time and all you're doing is a couple little things, but those have added a few things, and you gradually ramp into all of the rules and the hard stuff that's really making the game interesting. And I want to talk about this game for 3 hours, but I feel like I've already brushed against spoilers enough as it is. I don't want to spoil just the joy that is playing this game.
Yes, but if you do want to listen to Endless talking about Charterstone, we did actually have an entirely Charterstone episode, which Jay wasn't on,
Boo.
but my spouse was. So, I know what side my bread's buttered on. Sorry,
fair.
Man.
Totally fair. No.
So that was back in January.
If you want to hear me ramble for an hour or 4, just come on over. I will talk about that game for ages.
Okay. But yeah, Charterstone was on my list as well. At number 3. I don't know that I have a ton else to add. It's fun to open up the new stickers, right? It's fun to put them on. You end up with your own little custom board. You can theoretically keep on playing. I don't think that's really going to be a thing that people do so much, but I don't think people really expect that to be a thing for Legacy games. Like, they sometimes feel obligated to say, like, well, here are the rules if you keep on playing, but, like, come on. That's that's not what you're doing a Legacy game for. But I don't know where he's really going to be old enough for us to use it, but my 8-year-old insisted that I guess not he insisted, like, he begged that we get the recharge pack so that it could be played again with him as a more full participant this time around. So, it even has a vote from the younger set. I think the real question is, how long is it going to be until the 5-year-old is old enough to be able to play, so we can, like, play through the whole thing with my little nuclear family unit. But it was also on your list, Mike.
Yeah, I really like this game. It's a lot of fun. Exactly like Jay said, it's a really, really nice balance. Maybe a little easy in the beginning, but obviously it's okay, we're learning things. It does have some of the Legacy stuff of sometimes the Legacy rules themselves can be a little confusing at points. Like, it's easy to accidentally miss a card or to skip one of them, and that's kind of one of the dangers of having rules on cards, right? You accidentally have a couple clumped together, and all of a sudden, it's a big box of cards, and all of a sudden you're, like, looking around for 15 minutes, and it's not in the rule book because it's literally not in the rule book. But that's just kind of an expected thing, and I will say this is probably the best legacy style game I've ever played. It feels like it implements it the best, and it just is. It has a lot of simplicity, which really benefits the legacy style. So yeah, it's a lot of fun, and I've had 2 different groups quit on me halfway through. So that's a true legacy game.
Oh, that's rough. Okay, so that is Charterstone from Stonemaier Games. So what was your number one, Mike?
My number one was another legacy game, Gloom Haven. So, Gloom Haven is a tactical game where you get to play characters and you get to level them up, and then it's kind of like a dungeon crawl, and then you make some kind of story decisions, and it's great. I think it's an absolute blast. The box is kind of a mess when you're trying to organize everything. I ended up having to buy.
Oh God, yes.
I ended up having to get the broken token organizer, and that was its own whole thing. It was a lot of fun. I like putting those organizers together, so it was a lot of fun for me. But like, I had to get that to be able to actually keep everything organized, which is maybe my one complaint. It's just it's so packed full of content. It can actually be like actually harder to organize. You could have sold this thing to me with about half the content in a smaller box and not even half the price, and I would have been just as happy with it. I will say that for me, legacy games in general have kind of I'm just kind of over the fad. Like, I don't know that any of the legacy games that I've played have really lived up to that whole legacy ideal. And to me, Gloomhaven is fantastic, whether you have legacy aspects to it or not, right? Like, why I like Gloomhaven is I think the tactical combat is fantastic, and the advancement is fantastic. So I don't mind the legacy elements, but they're not the draw for me for this game. I just think it's like, the production and the real cool, like unlocking different characters later, that's cool. Like, but you wouldn't have to do legacy style to do that game. But whatever.
I would chime in there with, I feel like this is the only legacy game I've played that you could actually legitimately play it not as a legacy game. You don't have to wait until you've unlocked a bunch of stuff in the game. Everything is there from the start. Basically, all you're really unlocking is new stuff, new missions, which the book is there. You're just not supposed to go to it, but you can just, flip through and be like, let's do this mission.
Right.
And one thing I think is noteworthy is that, this is a fantasy game. This is a dungeon crawler, but it's not like you're, over the course of the campaign, a character.
Right.
Right? The story is the story of a group, and you will start out with, like, I think you're probably going to want to do it with, like, okay, one character is played by one player, but that character does some leveling up sorts of things, and then they retire.
Yep.
And the characters retiring unlocks new characters and also advances the story, which is which involves the story of the town of Gloomhaven. And in between the dungeon crawls, you go back to town and you have cards that make where you have to make decisions about what you're going to do. You might change your reputation, you might change the prosperity level of the town. They might unlock new missions. Changing the prosperity level can unlock new items for you to buy for the characters. So yeah, Gloomhaven was also on all of our lists. Gloomhaven is, I will tell you, lower on my list than anyone else who has it on. And I know this is going to sound weird, but it's down there because it's like it's too much. Right? When you're talking about it as a legacy game, most legacy games you play 12 to 20 times, and 20 is even on the high end. That's like if you're playing Pandemic Legacy and you're just constantly losing the missions. But Gloomhaven, you would have to play for hundreds of hours, I think, to actually play everything. And I know it's weird to think of that as a bad thing, but like it basically means that there is no way I would ever actually be able to play the story of Gloomhaven. And I know that you still get that normal tactical play, but I do really like these storytelling elements that you can have with a legacy game that you can't have with something else. And because Gloomhaven starts with so much in it, the evolution of gameplay from game to game is slower than it might otherwise be. It's more based on the scenarios than based on characters advancing. I mean, the biggest thing is just when you change which character you are. either because you've retired somewhere or you want to do something different. So the sort of juxtaposition is that probably my number 6 game for the year is Go Nuts for Donuts. It's like 5 Gloom Haven, 6 Go Nuts for Donuts. They could not possibly be any further apart on the weight scale.
I mean, literally, physically, I feel like you could, anchor a boat with Gloom Haven, or
It's enormous.
Yeah. I feel like a bodybuilder, I feel like if I lifted it over my head, I would strain something, and it would fall and crush me.
I only have one heavier game that I can think of.
What is that?
And is it made of cement?
It is on my 2018 list, so I will not reveal it. I will talk about it then.
All right, yes, because I don't think I own anything that is even like my Mansions of Madness with every single expansion kind of thing is like, or Thunderstone Quest with the that Kickstarter everything version is still just not. Okay, but that is Gloom Haven from Cephalofair Games. So we have the weird situation here, and this is quite unusual. But I mean, we've talked about already. I've mentioned already how much overlap there is, but we literally have the three of us, just the three of us. We have our lists are 4 of the 5 games each. Right, there are 4 games that each one of us put on our list. And so each one of us had exactly one game that was not mentioned by the others. Jay had Dice Forge, Mike had Warhammer Underworld, and then I have my number 1, which is Crony. Crony is from Mind Clash Games. This was originally a Kickstarter, but it is a worker placement game with time travel and multiple different there's 2 phases of the game, and there's time travel, and there's multiple different kinds of workers, and there is a cataclysm that is coming, and you have to sort of take actions to prepare for this cataclysm, and then it will occur, and then the object is to end up in charge of humanity after all the dust has settled. But because you've figured out that it's going to occur, or even after it's occurred, your future self can time travel resources back to your past self. But then, of course, when you get to that future turn that you time travel the resources from, you actually have to send them back in time, or else it can, tear holes in reality, aka lose you victory points. Well, I mean, it's a board game. How else are you going to represent it? And you have... This is, if you back to the Kickstarter, this is more impressive visually looking, but you've got normal workers, and then you've got these exosuits, and so these big exosuits can go out and take actions that normal workers cannot. And if you have if you buy the exosuit commander pack, or if you got it through the Kickstarter, you actually physically put the other worker inside the exosuit, and then put the exosuit out on the board when you play them out. So, but then even within the normal workers, there's engineers, and there's scientists, and there's administrators, and there's geniuses. So there's just a lot of different options. It is just a straightforwardly extremely good worker placement game. And then depending on how much you want to vary it up and whether or not you have some of the expansions, you can have different game lengths. You can have different victory conditions. There's a lot of variability that you can plug into there. And I don't know, and the 4 factions are like ideologies, and I don't know. It's just quite nifty. And that is Crony from Mind Clash Games. So that is our personal favorite games for 2017. And we are going to go with complete chalk here. And the 2017 Strange Assembly Game of the Year is Gloom Haven. As voted on by every single person who gets a vote. I mean, Gloom Haven crushed the competition. It was not even close. Not even close. So we've already talked about Gloom Haven, so it's not going to get another spiel here. But since it was on every single one of our lists, so 2017 Strange Assembly Game of the Year, Gloom Haven. And now that leads us on to 2018, where we will reproduce this same exercise. Again, we call this the the preliminary game of the year for 2018. These are all very tentative. There's lots and lots of things that came out in a given year that have not been played yet. And so take these as you will. There's unsurprisingly not going to be the same kind of overlap as there was with 2017, because 2017 had an extraordinary amount of overlap in our 5 presentations. There's a little bit, but not a bunch. Let's start with your number 5, Mike.
So, my number 5 is technically coming out in 2018. It's Brass Birmingham. Brass Birmingham is a worker placement game where you are playing through the industrial age in Birmingham, England, oddly enough. It's worker placement. You actually buy factories. You have cards that dictate where you can place what. And there's a bunch of different scoring mechanisms. So there's building the links between the towns. There's the factories that you're building. You need resources like iron and coal to actually build certain other factories. So then there's a market that you can buy that from, or you have to use what's on when you build like a coal factory. You take coal and put it on the factory. So people have to use that if they're connected to it to build their thing, and then if all of your coal is gone, you get to flip, and that's victory points that you get to score. It's of course a victory point game because it is a worker placement game. Honestly, it's a very heavy game. So this was also, it's essentially the sequel to Brass Lancashire, which is...
Yes, which let's note that, Brass Lancashire used to just be called Brass.
Right.
They renamed it because they were coming out with Brass Birmingham.
And funny enough, I actually got the Brass app, and it is the old Brass. Like Lincolnshire, when they renamed it, they also reworked some of the rules for it. And I think Brass came out in 2003 or something like that. Like it's an
7.
Oh, 7.
Think,
okay.
But...
Well, a little bit later than I thought, but still, it kind of...
It's a decade old. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And the rules are way harder than that. But anyways, so it is... Birmingham puts some interesting twists, and it changes some things, and I do think it is essentially better than Lancashire. But it's just a great game. It is very heavy. It's not going to be for everybody. The people I played with are literally accountants as their day jobs, and they loved it, and I love it. I'm not an accountant, but I love math and all that type of stuff, and I love games where you have all of these links, and you have to try and figure out the links, and they're not super obvious, and when you put down a factory with the coal that you put on it, if the market needs it, it will go to the market, and so you can instantly flip, and then, do I build this, and it's scoring points every turn, or do I build this other thing? And the card element of it is really elegant, and how it scales up with players is really elegant. And I just really like this game. There's clunkiness, but it feels like very intentional clunkiness. So anyways, that's Brass Birmingham. If you like worker placement, I would heavily recommend it. It's quite good.
Yeah, Brass Birmingham, the original design for Brass was Martin Wallace. He's got some co-designers on Brass Birmingham, and it's from Roxley Games. How about your number 5, Jay?
My number 5 is higher on somebody else's list because apparently I'm not the only one with major nostalgia for this. Yeah.
Okay, my number 5 is My Little Scythe from Stonemaier Games. And this is, as you might guess from the title, sort of a family game implementation of Scythe. In fact, it was designed by Hobie Chow and his daughter Vienna as they basically said, oh, we like Scythe, we want to make a kid's version of it. Stonemaier saw it and said, no, seriously, let's just make it a kid's version of Scythe. And so like Scythe, you're trying to collect trophies, and you get a certain number, or stars or whatever, and you get a certain number of them, and you win, and you go around in this game, and you have pie fights, and you're collecting gems, and you're collecting apples. You do even have a little bit of the upgrading your board, and it's just a really neat little game. It's got these... I now realize this is the second game in a row where I'm talking about something where usually I want to de-emphasize the importance of, but especially for a kid's game, it's important that it's got these really adorable figurines in it, because of these cutesy anthropomorphic animals. You can be the little tiger or the warthog or whatever. Everything's got vibrant popping colors. There's a couple of the colors that are not quite as standoutish as they need to be, or you can't really tell which zone of the board they're matched on, so that's not perfect. But it's a really solid family game. There's some actual depth to it, but you're probably not going to want to go for this if you just have a bunch of grown-ups going around. It's really more aimed to be played with teenagers or 10-year-olds or whatever. But with that, it is really so. It's not on the opposite end of Brass Birmingham in complexity, because somehow it still has a weight of 2 in the BGG rankings. But that's probably just because my sense of the weight of a game is completely skewed, and I just slice out the bottom part of games that I just never want to touch. But that is my number 5 is My Little Scythe from Stonemaier Games. What do you have up next for us, Mike?
My number 4 is Villainous from Wonderforge. Villainous, it lets you play as one of the 6 villains from 6 different Disney cartoons. So you've got the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland. You've got Ursula. You've got King John from Robin Hood, which is great nostalgia for me. It's a card game that does have a board base because you're moving around on spaces on the board, but mostly it's a card game. It's a lot of fun because every single villain is doing their own thing. So, like, Captain Hook has to try and find Peter Pan and bring him back to his ship and capture him. The Queen of Hearts has to get all of her characters that she's playing. She can turn them into, into goals or whatever, and she's trying to turn all of them into goals and then hit her ball through to win her croquet match. That's how she wins. And so it is a little bit asynchronous, not asynchronous. It's a little bit not super competitive, although there definitely are things like the way that people hurt you is another deck that is specific for your character. Like the Captain Hook deck has Peter Pan and it has Wendy and it has all those characters, and they show up and basically they turn off parts of your board that you're moving to. The spaces on the board that you take give you the different actions, usually 4 different actions. And then typically when a hero moves there, it'll block off half of the action. So when you can still move there, but you get half the actions you normally would. And you have to play your allies to take the heroes out. And a lot of times you actually need to play those heroes to get your objectives done. So it's really fun. I think it's a nice medium complexity. It's not terribly complicated. You can play with just about anybody, but there's also some interesting decisions. I actually like that the decks are not the different decks are not equal, so you can have someone who's more advanced a player play something like Jafar, who has to go and search for a whole bunch of different things in a very particular order to be able to, he has to go find the lamp, then he has to go free the genie, he has to open the Cave of Wonders, then find the lamp, then free the genie, then get him back and put him in servitude or whatever. They feel very, very different, and different people are going to be a different amount of successful, so you can kind of balance that out. It's just screaming for an expansion. The art, of course, is, and the pieces in general are just beautiful. The token that you have is like a colored clear plastic, and they're all colored. All of the components are color themed for that character. And they're, it's way more than it needs to be, but there's only 4 of them, so it doesn't feel like you're paying a bunch of extra for something you don't need, to me. Because I think the game's only like $30, and you can get it, please get it from your friendly local game store, but you can get it at Target. That's where I had to get it, because it took them a long time for my friendly local game store to get it, and I didn't even think they could until they did. Anyways, it's a great game. It's a lot of fun, a lot of nostalgia. This is another game I really hope they put another expansion for. They could just do another standalone expansion that's just 6 more villains. Or they could do Heroes if they really wanted to. Anyways, that is my number 4, which is Villainous.
So then we will turn to you, Jay.
Right, so my number 4 is Petrichor. I think that's how you pronounce it. This is just a lovely, light little game where you're the clouds. There's a field. Your goal is to water the plants and get them to grow and spring. And the game takes place over, I think it was 3 years, and so there's, each season. In the spring, you want the water to go down so that the plants will grow. In the fall, you want them to be growing and getting bigger. And yeah, just the goal is you're trying to get the plants to grow. You get points based on every time a harvest season happens, how many plants you've managed to help grow. Also, a lot of it too is your clouds. So a lot of the game is using the wind to move the clouds, using the water cycle of getting water into the clouds and then raining down onto the plants so that they can grow, blowing the clouds around so that they rain where you want them to rain. It's just a fun, lovely little light game that it's just so pretty too. So yeah, that's my number 4 is Petrichor.
Yeah, and I would like to say here that Jay, it is impressive and it does not happen much. This was a game that when you put that on your list, I had never heard of it.
I've never heard of it either.
I had to look it up to be like, what is this game? Which I suppose is good, right? I mean, as much as obviously like, okay, clearly we're going to pick Gloom Haven as the game of the year for 2017. It's not like that's news to anyone who follows board games. But hey, look, here's a game that even most of us have never heard of. And then now you can try out. I feel like it's a more of a valuable contribution. All right, so my number 4, which was also Jay's number 5, and which I think both of us talked about at Gen Con, is Choose Your Own Adventure, House of Danger. And that is indeed branded Choose Your Own Adventure, just like those books that many of us read when we were kids.
Yep.
And it's even down to the packaging. The front of the box looks like one of the books. They use the same font on the cards that they used in the books, I guess. So this really is you start with your character. There's some goofy story because, right, if you remember Choose Your Own Adventure books, some of these had the most bizarre stories. And you are going through and it's done with cards instead of a book, obviously, but you look at the card, it gives you a choice, and then you decide which way to go. And then you go here and you go there and you go through. It's not a direct correlation to the book. It does let you backtrack some if you want. Whether or not that's a good idea.
That's a direct correlation to the book. You didn't hold you turn the page and you hold your finger where you just were just to see if you die on this one.
There were times I had 6 fingers in that book.
Right?
Okay, yes, you do that, but you actually can within the same, you can get somewhere, there are 3 different paths to get somewhere, and then it might let you, go back down one of the paths you didn't take while having already taken the other path. But yes, of course, Choose Your Own Adventure books had so many just random, and then you die, that you had to put your finger in the book, or else you were going to have to, replay through the whole thing. That would have been silly. No. Of course you put your finger in the book and check. There is some randomness in this too. There are some tasks that you have to attempt to test on, and how hard those are can vary based on how well you've been doing. Things can get worse for you and make your tasks harder, and then when they get bad enough, it resets the difficulty back down, but then dings you somewhere else, I think on your psychic meter. It's not a deep game, but it was a lot of fun, and yeah, it does get a little nostalgia kick. I don't know, what else did you want to say about House of Danger?
I mean, yeah, that's basically it. I have huge amounts of nostalgia for those Choose Your Own Adventure books, reading those as a kid. And I suspect if you also have positive nostalgia for it, you would like playing this game, because now you get to choose your own adventure with a couple friends. If you have no idea what we're talking about, this is not the game for you. But if you have that nostalgia bubble, you're probably going to like it.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. If you have no idea what Choose Your Own Adventure is and you never did a Choose Your Own Adventure book, yeah, it's probably not going to have as much. I mean, you do get the little storytelling experience, but you could probably just go to the library and check out a Choose Your Own Adventure book at that point, or one of the more modern implementations of that are perhaps less randomy. Then man, because those books are random.
I wouldn't because I also own this game, because of course I have a ton of, like, everybody about our age just love those books, to the best of my knowledge. I would say it's not something I would tell someone not to play, maybe not buy, but like if somebody just wants somebody to play with, like I would say play with them. But yeah, no, I wouldn't tell anybody. I wouldn't tell anybody to buy this unless they have a lot of nostalgia. Like even just the box is like, oh, this is that good stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so that is Choose Your Own Adventure, House of Danger from Z-Man Games. And then we are up to number 3, Mike.
Aha. So 2018, my number 3 is seemingly the hot game of the moment, or one of the top hot games of the moment, which is Root.
No, it is.
Yeah.
You're right, yeah.
Well, the other hot game I would say is my number 1. So, anyways.
Fair point. You're right.
It's hot either way. So Root. Probably everybody's heard about this, but just in case, Root is a game with a board. It's kind of weird. It's weird in a good way, in that in the base game you have 4 different factions, and each of them plays very differently. That's part of why I like it. Like, they're very, very wildly different. So you have the cats who are actually invading the forest, and they actually move into the different sections, and they're actually trying to industrialize the forest. You have the airy bird guys who are kind of in between the forest, and they were the rulers of the forest before the cats came in, and they work with they actually have a very powerful action system, where they build this, like, the number of actions they take every turn actually increases. However, they're essentially making promises whenever they do that, so you have to add to the number of things you have to do in a turn, and eventually you're just not going to be able to do all of them, or you're going to win the game real hard. One of those two. And whenever you aren't able to, you have to go into default and basically completely reset. So part of the strategy for the game is, when do I want to try and do that? But it's a very different experience, because you have to try and make sure that you're hitting the right thing. Then you have the Vagabond, who is just, you're not playing a faction, you're playing a person who's kind of a profiteer. It is going around and trading with people and trying to get his stuff up, and he can actually band with a group. He can kind of jump in with a group and then say, well, you know what? If they win, then I get to win now. You can't do that, obviously, with whoever's in first, because that would be really silly. But just the asynchronous is so interesting in something that's not like a card game. It is actually a board game, and you all interact with each other, but at the same point, you all play so differently. And the artwork is fantastic. I can see why this game got so hot. I don't know anymore. I guess I'm just an old curmudgeon. Before I hit 40. But anytime anybody's like really hot on a game, I don't know. I just always have this instant skepticism. But I picked this up and tried it, and my friendly local game store only got 1 copy, and I was like, you know what? Fine, I'll get it, and we'll see. And I was just blown away. I think this game is great. Yeah, so that is my number 3, which is Root.
That is Root from Leader Games. And then, what is your number 3, Jay?
All right, so my number 3 is a board game called The Reckoners. This is based on a series of young adult novels by Brandon Sanderson. So if you haven't read those novels, you should stop listening to this, go on Audacity, download them, listen to them. They are great. Basically, they are novels where it's a universe where superheroes happened, but they're all evil. And the main character joins up with the Reckoners, which is a group who their goal is to defeat the superheroes so that, humanity can be free again. So in this board game, it's a cooperative board game. You are playing various members of the team from the books. If you've read the books, you'll recognize all of the characters. Each one has their own, strengths and weaknesses, and brings different things to the board. So the first novel is called Steelheart because he is sort of Superman who's evil. The board game, the goal is to defeat him. But you can't just start by attacking Superman. You gotta go deal with his henchmen first. Also important is every single superhero has some sort of weakness. And so, when dealing with a superhero, some of them you can just punch in the face a lot. They don't have invulnerability or whatever, you can just punch them in the face. Some of them, such as Steelheart, you have to figure out what their weakness is. So you have to spend some time researching them to find their weakness and deal. Once you get their weakness done, then you can start punching them in the face and get rid of them. In addition to dealing with the superheroes, it's basically martial law, martial state. So there's, troops running around that you have to deal with before they punch you in the face first. There's also super science, and so in the course of the game, you want to get money to buy super science to help you out. So basically how it works is there's dice. Every character has their own dice. So that's part of how they're focused is the dice are basically the same, except let's say I'm playing the guy who's really good at money. So I have one side that's doubling up on money. You're playing the guy who's good at punching the supers. His punching the super side is doubled up. Or the person who's really good at researching has doubled up symbols. Anyway, you start each round by rolling the dice. You start with a couple, and then some things will give you just generic dice to roll as well. You roll the dice. You have to keep at least one. You can keep as many as you like. You roll it a couple times. At this point, you've got what dice you are activating on, what you're able to actually do with the dice. And then, you just spend the resources that you're getting from the dice to defeat the supers and eventually, hopefully, defeat Steelheart. And having played it a couple times, one of the most important things in my mind for a good co-op game is you need to feel like you could lose. But you need to not just be... It needs to not be hopeless. It needs to be that that's the thing that could happen if you play well and if you roll well. And this has that feeling of you're in trouble. If things could go wrong really easily, so you have to be careful, you have to be smart. But if you are, and if the dice come out well, you can actually win. So that is my number 3, is The Reckoners, based on Brandon Sanderson's novels.
So we've established that a way to get Jay to like your stuff is to license it from Brandon Sanderson, right?
Yes. Spoiler alert, yes. That is definitely true.
And The Reckoners is published by Navu Games. So my number 3 so far for 2018 is Coimbra. This is right there in the Euro genre, or the Euro style, rather. So it's got some sort of theme about earning prestige in Renaissance Portugal or whatever. Anyhow, it's a dice placement game. So you roll your dice. The dice have both color, like the dice have different colors, the dice have numbers. You have to you roll the pool of dice, and then they have to be drafted. And depending on what the significance of these different combinations of the numbers and the colors is, given your situation, other players' situation, the status of the game, it can really change up what it is that you're trying to do. Get up all of your different combinations of victory points, because, Euro game. And there's also added replayability from which different citizens and monasteries and expeditions are out in a given version of the game. I just really like the continued innovation of doing stuff with dice, and I don't know why exactly, but I really like these games that use the dice not as a do you succeed or fail mechanism, or not even just as a randomizer of what your actions are going to be. I tend to find myself honestly more drawn to card games for that sort of thing, like, I don't know, every deck building game ever, which I seem to like greatly. But I really like these games where they use the dice as a broader randomizer for the game rather than like some personal thing that's just for you. And that is my number 3 for 2018, which is Coimbra from Eggertspiel. And now we're going to let Mike kind of fudge a little bit here for his number 2, I think.
I mean, I think it's just a little bit, but yeah. So my number 2 is Dinosaur Island, Totally Liquid. Now, this is an expansion, which I don't think we normally do unless it's like a full standalone. I guess Brass Birmingham kind of is the same, but it's not. Anyways.
But Birmingham is a standalone game. It's a re-implementation of Brass, but it's a standalone game. You can every individual who's voting gets to kind of make their own decision on, is a new version of a game new enough that they think that it counts as one of the best games of the year rather than just a tweak of something else. So, Brass Birmingham, fine. But yeah, Totally Liquid is an expansion. We don't usually do expansions, but the original game is not super available until 2018 anyway.
Right, yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. So I kickstarted the expansion in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, because I wanted to get a copy of Dinosaur Island in 2017. However, I could not do that because I could not find it that was not, like the price wasn't completely up on from a reseller or whatever, if I could even find it. So this was my first chance to actually get it. It was the new Kickstarter, which was fine because I also got Duelosaur Island, which is also fantastic. It basically is also this slot, and Totally Liquid the expansion. I mean, it's basically Jurassic Park, but they didn't bother to get the license, but also they did a fantastic job on the art direction and the components and whatnot, so it's completely fine. Also, I find it humorous that there actually is a Jurassic Park game that's coming out pretty soon, I think from Mondo, like next year. Anyways, it's a worker placement-ish drafting, building point game, where basically you pick dinosaurs that you want to build, you get DNA, you build the dinosaurs, you make sure your security level's high enough so they don't break out and eat people. You have people that come to your park. The dinosaurs attract a whole bunch of people, but you have to make sure that the people have places to go. There's a bunch of different random stuff, so every time you play the game, there's different things that you're doing. It's just great. I love basically everything about this game. I love the aesthetics of it. I love how just tongue-in-cheek it is, but it doesn't get lazy with the tongue-in-cheek. It's not just tongue-in-cheek. Like, it actually has its own thing. I think the designs are great. The gameplay, I think, is really, really fun. I do worry a little bit that it probably is technically... You could probably solve this game, is what I feel like. Like, obviously, there's a lot of random components that change round and around even, but still it feels like you probably could figure out what the best things are and then just straight up go for that and probably win a lot of the time. But also, I don't care because that's not how I really want to play the game. I want to do the best I can do, but I'm not trying to do the absolute best. I will take a bad card just because I think it's great because it's, like a security guard who looks really grumbly or whatever. So, I don't know, it's just a great game. I love it all around. Probably my favorite Kickstarter I have ever backed. It was 100% worth it. This is the game that may be heavier than Gloom Haven because it had metal coins in the Kickstarter edition, and there were a lot of them in it, and there's a lot of plastic dinos too. And I tell you, this box is super heavy. It's it's probably not as heavy as Gloom Haven, but it feels like it is because of the size difference. Because it's not a small box anyways, but it's still way heavier than you expect it to be with the Kickstarter coins. But anyways, that's my number 2, Dinosaur Island, Totally Liquid from Pandasaurus Games.
Yep, metal coins will drastically increase the weight of things. Jeez, and people do like metal coins sometimes. All right, so we'd kick it to Jay here, but then we just make him say again that his number 2 appears higher on someone else's list.
Yep.
So I will just go ahead with my number 2 because I'm self-centered like that. And my number 2 for 2018 is Space Base from Alderac Entertainment Group, designed by John Clare. And I have to tell you, when I sat down to play this game, I was not thinking it was going to be something that I was going to super enjoy. Right? Just the name, it's cutesy. Does not inspire a lot of confidence in me when cutesy is what you go for the name of the game. But it ended up playing really well. So in Space Base, you have this space station, I guess, and you have these slots at the space station to dock your ships. And each of those slots is numbered from 1 to 12, aka the sort of numbers you could roll on 2d6. Because on your turn, you are going to roll the dice, and then by the time you're done, you can activate, either you can add the dice together or take them separately and activate the ships that are in a given slots on your board. And then when you do that, everybody else, if they have things that can use that, they have the ability to activate too. And so you put something into a slot, and then when you put something else into the slot, it kicks the old thing a little bit out. And so it's the newest thing that you activate on your turn, and then this combination of the old things that is activated on other players' turns. You're ultimately building an engine here so that you can generate a lot of stuff in one turn and then try to buy a big point card, because you do have to try to do a lot of generation in one round, because you don't just get to keep all of your resources at the end of your turn. And so it has some elements in common with Machikoro, but it plays significantly better than Machikoro, I think, partially because you can choose to adjust your strategy in a better way. Unlike Machikoro, right, which has this, like, certain buildings are just way, way, way better depending on the player count. And so you have this issue where you're like, oh, well, I don't ever want this kind of building in a 4-player game, but I would always want it in a 2-player, or vice versa. But they're still out there clogging the universe up, even if they're the lousy version. You don't get that in Space Base. And this is another game that's quite light. Now that we're talking about the lightness, I'm kind of surprised at how not far off of My Little Scythe it is in, like, the BGG complexity rankings, but it's definitely not really that close to My Little Scythe. You can play it with family stuff, but you can actually just play it with grown-ups too. And that is my number 2 so far for 2018, Space Base from Alderac Entertainment Group. Mike, I believe you have the 900-pound gorilla on deck.
Oh yeah, the 900-pound number 1 Keyforge. So yeah, my number 1 is Keyforge because it's great and it's a lot of fun and is one of the most exciting card games that I've seen in a very long time. I am someone who's very bad about being very excited about a lot of different card games, and it does tend to wear people out with friends and whatnot. But Keyforge is one of the ones I have just, it has taken off with everybody I've played it with. The game is so fun and so pretty different in that it is not technically like I'm directly attacking you, but it's still easy enough, right? I can try and clear your board, but really what I'm trying to do with my board is I'm trying to get all of this amber together. It is the unique game where every deck that you buy is randomly generated, and you get 3 different factions. You get an equal number of cards from each faction. Each turn, you have to choose which faction you're going to do something with, and you can only do stuff with those, regardless if they're on the board, in your hand, whatever. That's what you have to do with that turn. And then you just try and play, and essentially it's resource gathering, and you try and flip 3 keys, but that's really just a way to make sure that your resources that you're gathering essentially stay secured. It plays super fast. I think the art and the world in general is a lot of fun. I love how different each of the factions feels. I love the unique deck thing. It's really nice to play a card game and not basically have deck building entirely taken out of your hands. There are kind of predictable, I wouldn't say problems, but things you might expect. There are decks that get 4 of a single card that are like, you don't really want 4 of this card. Like you a couple of this, and this is a great deck. 3 and 4, and not enough creatures, and it starts to get real hard to play that deck. But that's kind of part of the fun of it. And even if you get a bad deck, it's $10, and you can play that to, maybe be a handicap for someone who's not super used to games, and you just have to make the best of this deck. I love everything about it. I really like the unique games idea. I think this is one that could definitely hit a lot of different markets and could actually grow the card game market, because it's easy enough that someone who's never played card games before generally can pick it up and get it really quickly. So yeah, that is my number 1, Keyforge.
Okay, and then Jay, this is what cheated you out of your number 2?
Yeah, that was my number 2, was Keyforge, because everything Mike said. This is such a well-designed, interesting game. Like, one of the things I love about it, as Mike mentioned, you have 3 factions in your deck. Each turn, you pick one faction, and that's the one that you are using this turn. And so it's, very easy to get into the situation of, okay, I can either add cards to my board from my hand, or I can use what's already out on my board, but I probably can't really do both. And so there's a lot of interesting push and pull dynamics like that. But yeah, it's just such a well-designed, interesting game. And I really do think the fact that if you could deck build in this game, you would have stupid broken decks so quickly. The fact that the decks are built for you, and so you just have to see what you get, makes it so much more fun.
That is Keyforge from Fantasy Flight Games, and if I recall correctly, let's see, it's designed by Richard Garfield. Do you guys know who that is? Did he design some other game?
Wasn't that the cat that really hates Mondays but likes lasagna?
That is an even more insulting...
No, wasn't he president like 50 years ago or something? Is that a better one?
I was just gonna go with that's right, he's the guy who designed Hive Mind.
Spellfire?
Oh, that was not a great game.
Ooh, he's the guy who did Robo Rally. That's it.
He did. That is a better game than Spellfire.
He actually did want to do that game first.
And I want to point out, he did not design Spellfire.
Did he not? Why am I thinking?
By the way.
No.
Why is that in my brain then?
Who knows what... yeah.
Because TSR ended up as part of Wizards of the Coast, and it was a TSR game. But yeah, Spellfire, if I recall correctly, and God only knows if I do, I think it was one of those games where they went to design the game and were like, what resources? No. You can just play whatever you want whenever you want it. That's not going to be a problem at all.
I see no flaw in this plan, no, yeah.
Yeah, that game was real bad.
But yes, in case you're not familiar, Richard Garfield was the designer of Magic the Gathering. And yes, you're right, Mike. He went to Wizards of the Coast to try to pitch them on Robo Rally. They said, we don't have the ability to make a game like that. What else you got? And he's like, well, we've got this game, this kind of fast-playing card game that you can do between D&D sessions or while you're waiting for people to show up or something. And a legend was born.
And Standard is fantastic right now, and they just announced the $10 million year that they're going to do for Magic. I don't know. It's exciting time for board games and card games.
Yeah, well,
Magic.
that $10 million includes Magic the Gathering arena prizes.
Yes, it does.
So yes, so you have other ways to. I mean, yeah, to my benefit, because I don't play that much in the way of lifestyle games anymore. To my benefit, Magic has shifted its focus over the last however many years to shall we say, a more casual market. You're much more likely to get me by releasing, they just released a Magic the Gathering board game, and then there's the Explorers of Ixalan, I think that was last year, which was kind of it reminds me of War of Honor was for Legend of the Five Rings. You're playing Magic, but it's a...
Sorry.
Anyhow, but I'm much more likely to buy something like Explorers of Ixalan than I am to buy a booster box. Or you could just release a Magic the Gathering branded D&D book, which is amazing. The Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. Anyhow.
Oh, wait, does Jay know about the Brandon Sanderson novella?
I have heard about that. Has it been released yet? I want to read it. Okay.
And it is free.
Ooh, I will definitely want to read that then.
Would you like to tell people what it is other than a Brandon Sanderson novella?
I mean, you had me at Brandon Sanderson novella, so...
It is a Brandon Sanderson magic novella. They released for free. I don't know what the name of it is. It's an entirely new Planeswalker, because apparently it was just a story he had around and he fit it into Magic.
That sounds like something he would do, yeah.
Well, it's a general writer thing.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the strengths of Magic, right, is actually it is a fairly flexible universe, so that's not a hard... Brandon Sanderson's Law of Magic, I don't think that's it at all.
The name of it, I believe, is Children of the Nameless. So...
Oh, there we go. Okay. I was trying to Google it, but my Google foo failed me.
Then let's go on to your number one, Jay, which is not at all a lifestyle game either.
No, but it's definitely brushing up against the idea. This is Star Wars Legion. It's FFG's newest Star Wars miniature game. It's squad-based combat where, you've got Darth Vader or Luke Skywalker running around with lightsabers stabbing each other. You've got squads of stormtroopers. I mean, one of my favorite parts of it is you've got an ATST, just giant nonsense walking around. Yeah, it's fun. So, you think war game, you're thinking like the old guys with the measuring tape and all of that. And so one of the things I love that FFG keeps doing with their miniatures games is really standardizing the movement. You don't have to be like, oh, he could go 12 inches. No, there's little tools, and for the regular miniatures, you just put the tool one end against the miniature, you put the other end where you want them to move to, boom, you move them. They sped up the squads, you just move the squad leader, and then the rest of them just have to stay close by. And then for the vehicles, they have much more constrained movement, but it's still super fast, super easy. And it is objective based. You start the game, you got a couple cards that determine what is the objective, what are you working towards. It's not just about killing all of that rebel scum that's in your way. Sometimes you just need to get over to where they are, or keep them from sabotaging some of your toys. You also have, the terrain effects going on. And you can run around with Darth Vader and you can force choke people. Who doesn't love that? So yeah, Star Wars Legion by Fantasy Flight, Star Wars miniatures. It is a lot of fun, although I will say it is a heavy miniatures game, so I think I've spent more time assembling and painting miniatures than I have actually playing them at this point, but that's partially because I like assembling and painting miniatures, so...
And they're really not bad minis to build.
Oh, they're great to look at. My Boba Fett, I love how he came out. He looks great.
Oh yeah, no, but I mean, they actually are just not difficult to put together. They mostly fit.
Yeah, no, that is also true. They are really easy to assemble.
Okay, that is Star Wars Legion from Fantasy Flight Games. So then my number one of 2018 so far is Thunderstone Quest from Alderac Entertainment Group. And I will admit that I did consider whether or not this should be not eligible, but, sort of eligible at all, because it is another iteration of Thunderstone. But while I don't think I'd really go say Thunderstone to Thunderstone Advance was enough of a change up that that would have done it on, there's quite a bit of change up with Thunderstone Quest. So Thunderstone Quest was one of the very first deck building games that came out after Dominion, and it really was based on the idea of, well, okay, Dominion came up with this great mechanic, and Dominion is really just the mechanic. So what if you had deck building with a purpose, like you built a deck and then you did something with it? And because we're all gamers, the thing that you do with your deck is you build a deck of heroes and weapons and spells and stuff, and then you went into a dungeon to fight monsters. Because, we all know how that works. And I think Thunderstone Quest is the best implementation of that yet. I think every version of the game, they've made it more fluid and given you more options. This one has a lot of different tweaks you can do when you spend your turn going into the village, which means you're improving your deck. And it's also added movement within the dungeon. So you've got your little... It's a miniature, but it could be whatever. You've got your miniature that marks where you are in the dungeon, and they've gotten rid of the whole light as a substitute or alternative sort of attack, which is effectively what it was in the first game and always was the most confusing part of the game. And it has now just become a way to move physically deeper into the dungeon to fight the nastier stuff. I have always liked Thunderstone, and I liked it. It was better when it was Thunderstone Advance, and now it's even better when it's Thunderstone Quest. This was launched as a Kickstarter. The retail release actually only hit relatively recently, and right now at retail you can only get the base game. Like if you got the Kickstarter version, you got multiple other quests in it. You can do the quest thing or not. You can also just play them as... It's like, oh look, it's an expansion with more cards, but you can also play through the sort of story. I mean, the story is a little disappointing. It's not as there's not as much story to the story as I was hoping there would be as you play through the different things. So the quests are basically just different specific setups of the game. Like there's going to be a certain pool of cards and different tiles in the dungeon because as you move deeper into the dungeon, there are different physical locations now, so they can have different modifiers. Like when you're fighting somebody in this place, there's a higher, but it's tougher to kill them. That sort of thing. But I don't know. It just ups even further what was already a good game, and at least for now, I'm going to say that is enough to let it be something I can put on my list, even though it's an advancement of an existing game, and that is Thunderstone Quest from Alderac Entertainment Group. So that is our personal lists here. So as is usually the case with the preliminary results, because not everybody has had enough time to play everything and sort of kind of condense down some of the votes. It's much more spread out. And because this is the preliminary game of the year, we tolerate ties. Well, I don't. Yeah, so we do tolerate ties here, which means that then there wouldn't be a runner-up for game of the year, and at the moment our preliminary game of the year is or games of the year are Root and Keyforge, which is reminiscent of our 2017 preliminary games of the year, which was Legend of the Five Rings and Gloom Haven. So, the new hot pseudo lifestyle sort of game, and then the sort of consensus best game amongst the board gaming community. We'll then see how Keyforge continues to roll out in this. Mike, you and Jay, I think it's fair to say that you guys can be volatile in your votes on the lifestyle sorts of games, right? Like you mentioned this, Jay, yeah, like, right, like the new one will come out, you'll get excited, then the next year a different new one comes out, and then you get excited, and then you have to see how much staying power the other one has. I suspect that it's done so well that financially Keyforge is going to have staying power. It's been gonzo as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I mean, lack of availability of product is the only thing I can see hampering it. Which there's a little bit right now, but not enough. Like, there's enough out in the ecosystem that, people have it. It's because people bought 10 decks instead of buying one deck.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun to see all the different combinations, see the silly names, and I have He Who Smokes Desire, and I think that's a great name.
Oh, there's so many great names. I have one that's something like He Who Willingly Ingests Poison or something like that.
One of them I saw was She Who Destroys You Specifically.
Yes, if you're not familiar, these are the names of the archons, right? Like the sort of that's the name of your deck. Then because each deck is unique for that particular random selection of cards, and these are procedurally generated names. So you've got some algorithm that's just spitting out not random names, but algorithmically generated names. They've already had to modify the algorithm and recalls and like literally they've banned decks already because they had like bizarrely racist sort of names like that, and that required them to refine their algorithm a little bit more.
And they have an incentive coming up for retailers where you can get a display of boxes where the names will all incorporate your store's name somehow.
Wow. That I could see that selling like hotcakes. If I owned a game store, I'd be like, that is awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
Lord of the Curio Cavern. So we're pretty long on the time frame here. So let's go ahead and wrap that up. So our 2017 Game of the Year was Gloom Haven, and our 2018 preliminary Game of the Year is a tie between Keyforge and Root. So we will see you here next year, where we will do our final Game of the Year for 2018. Now, I know that last year I said we were going to try to move that up earlier in the year, rather than doing this all right at the end of the following year. That obviously didn't happen this year, but I don't know why I'm even mentioning it now because it implies like maybe it'll happen next year, but then I'll probably just make sure it doesn't happen. So God only knows. But we'll see. We will be back for this next year, and maybe it will all be together at the end of the year, and maybe it will be split up. So we're just having a game of the year thing in the middle of the year, like most other of these board game sorts of awards are. But until then, you've been listening to Strange Assembly, your tabletop gaming podcast. You can find us on the web at www.strangeassembly.com. You can subscribe to this podcast there in the Apple Podcast app, in iTunes, the Google Play Music Store, Spotify, Stitcher, all over the place, really. You can also find us at the usual social media. We're Strange Assembly on Instagram. We're at Strange Assembly on Twitter and facebook.com/strangeassembly. We always appreciate it when you follow us or like us or whatever on any of those platforms, or if you give us a rating or review on iTunes. All of these things help raise the visibility of the podcast and help other people discover it. So we always greatly appreciate that. We appreciate it even more if you choose to stop by our Patreon page at patreon.com/strangeassembly. That supports not only this podcast, but also the website. So if you go to strangeassembly.com, you'll find a variety of board and card and tabletop role-playing game reviews and some other content. But if you want to get a hold of me directly, I'm Chris at strangeassembly.com. I always love to hear from you. Comments, criticism, feedback, just, yo, how you doing? I always love that sort of stuff. Again, that's Chris at strangeassembly.com. But until then, for Jay Earl and Mike Cook, I'm Chris Stevenson, and this is Strange Assembly. Never stop gaming.
Aw, Dip, I'm not again.